Hello and welcome to the InfinityQS webinar on our new Enterprise Integration Service, or EIS. It's a brand new product for us and we're excited to talk about the new capabilities it offers for enhancing the integration of your InfinityQS quality data across your enterprise. So, let's get started. We'll begin with a brief explanation of what EIS is and how it's structured. Then we'll present several use cases for EIS that you might find beneficial in your organization. For each of those use cases, we'll present a live demonstration of the software in action, going step by step through the configuration process and showing you the results. So what is EIS? In its simplest form, EIS is a routing service for moving information from one location to the next. In the graphic below, we're showing two data repositories. One will act as the source of our data to be routed, while the other will be the destination. The EIS configuration that enables that routing consists of a data reader, which is responsible for grabbing the appropriate data from the source, and a data writer, which will ultimately write that data to the destination. The reader and writer communicate using a new XML-based format called the InfinityQS Data Exchange Format, or IDEF. To cover the many different possible scenarios for information routing using EIS, there are a number of different readers and writers available. If you're interested in routing measurement data, meaning the quality data that is collected on your shop floor, you would use our Measurement Data Interface, or MDI, and we have versions that connect to our standard Proficient databases as well as our ESPC databases, which is our web-based quality application. If, on the other hand, you want to route more structural information, such as parts, processes, spec limits, and your various other descriptors, you would use our Universal Data Interface, or UDI. If you need to route MDI or UDI information outside of your network, for example over the cloud, you would also use the HTTP reader and writer. To interact with external data sources, for example your MES system or even a measurement tool or gauge, we offer IDEF file readers and writers. This offers the capability for your ID department or even an OEM provider to create IDEF files that can route InfinityQS quality data to and from external data sources and destinations. There are several other reader types, such as the AQDEF reader for harvesting data in the format popular in the automotive industry, as well as our InfinityQS Forms Results Reader. The latter is another new upcoming product from InfinityQS, which will allow you to collect data from mobile or handheld devices, and will be the subject of its own webinar in the next few months. These readers and writers can be combined in various ways to accomplish many different tasks. An example of an IDEF file, in this case an MDI, is shown here. While not getting too deep into any specifics, you can notice areas in the file that correspond to items that are used in Proficient measurement data, such as timestamp, subgroup size, part, limits, etc., as well as the actual measurement values. Now let's start discussing some of the ways you might want to use EIS in your organization. We'll begin with routing from one Proficient database to another. The first use case is a situation where you have multiple site-specific Proficient databases around your organization and wish to have all that data available in a single corporate-wide database so that you can get a true big-picture view of your organization. Here we have a graphic illustrating this situation. Sites 1, 2, and 3 all have their own Proficient databases. This might be due to having undergone a site-by-site implementation, or simply because the local sites prefer to have their servers and data located within their own walls. Unfortunately, the situation can be limiting when it comes to looking at your quality data from a corporation-wide perspective. EIS enables the uploading of measurement data from each site into a single corporate database, so everything is in one place and available for easy analysis. And because it runs as a Windows service, it all happens automatically and without any further user intervention once it's been configured. The next scenario involves disseminating structural information from a corporate database out to the individual sites, which can be very helpful in maintaining naming consistency throughout the organization. Here we have the same sites represented as before, but the issue is different. In this case, corporate headquarters maintains a master parts list for the entire organization, and ideally, all sites would maintain the same naming convention. Unfortunately, when a new part is added, there can be a possibility that each site may enter that same part name slightly differently, which can cause real problems later on. To help avoid such situations, EIS can be configured to automatically forward new part information directly to the individual sites, thereby ensuring consistency across the organization. The final scenario in this section deals with preventing data loss on the shop floor due to an interruption in your network or database connection. In this situation, each workstation could save the quality data captured there into a local database, for example using Microsoft Access. EIS would then be configured to forward that information from the local database to the site's production database. In the event that the database connection is interrupted, due for example to a power or server failure, a disruption in the service, or an inadvertent permissions change, the shop floor data could continue to accumulate in the local database as though nothing had happened. Eventually, when the database connection is restored, EIS would automatically forward all accumulated data into the production database. The bottom line is there would be no loss of your critical quality data. Now let's talk about how you would configure EIS to accomplish these things. If the routing occurs within your network, it's very straightforward. You would point a proficient data reader, either MDI or UDI, to the source database, and it will begin generating IDEF messages when it detects new or unchanged records. A proficient data writer will grab those IDEF messages and push the contained data to the destination database. If your data is being routed over the cloud, you would start with the same proficient data reader, but would add an HTTP writer, which would pass the IDEF message over the internet to an HTTP reader located on the receiving server. Finally, a proficient data writer would take the IDEF from the HTTP reader and push the data to the destination database. Okay, let's get started with the first demo. In this demo, we're going to show how EIS can take data from a source database, in this case a proficient database, and route that data to a proficient destination database. And in this example here, you can see I've got two charts showing. These are both each pointed to a separate database. So you can see one is pointed to my source database and the other one down here is pointed to my destination database. In looking at the charts, you can see that the curves are the same, showing that the data so far is in each database is the same. And let's see how we're going to configure EIS to accomplish this task for us. So I'm going to open up the EIS GUI window, and you can see that there are a number of configurations listed here, and we'll get to those as the demonstration goes on. The one I'm going to be using now is this one at the bottom called PF source to PF destination. And that's going to enable us to write measurement data from a proficient database as a source and using another proficient database as a destination. So I'm going to go through the process of adding a configuration, even though I'll use this one that I've already created just to show you the process. So I'm going to click on Add here, and it brings up my configuration window. And I'm going to give this configuration some sort of name. I'll call it PF Test, just to give it a name for now. I've got a click box here if I want to enable or disable this configuration once it's been defined. On the left, I've got a list here of the different readers that are available for me to choose from, and I can scroll up and down and see the different ones there. And some of those names should look familiar from earlier in the demo. For this demo, I'm going to pick the one called Proficient Measurement Data Reader, because that's exactly what I want to do, take measurement data from one proficient database to another. So it brings up another dialog box that's going to ask me for a few things. One is just the read interval, me telling EIS how often do I want it to look for new records or changed records in the source database. And if I click on the drop down, you can see there's any number of units of time that you can use. I'm going to stick with 1 minute just for the sake of brevity. The other thing I need to input is where is my source database. So I'm going to click on the select button here, and it's going to bring up a list of the databases that I happen to have defined on my computer right now that I'm using for this demo. And I'm going to pick the one here called EIS Source 1, and that's just the demo database I have created for this. It's going to ask me to authenticate to prove who I am. I can do that quickly. Now on the bottom here, you see there's a path name in here with this long sort of pseudo-random path name for the folder. And this is the temporary storage folder that EIS creates for each configuration. And this is where the IDEF messages are stored. So when the measurement data reader creates the IDEF message, it stores it in this folder. The accompanying writer will then look into that same folder and then grab a new IDEF message when a new one shows up. So that's all we really need to do here. I'm going to say OK. And now on the other side are the writers. Every configuration needs to include a reader and a writer. You can see there's a list here. Some of the ones have actually been disabled because these are universal data writers, and those are incompatible with measurement data readers. So those are not selectable. So I've only got these to choose from, and I'm going to pick this one called Proficient Measurement Data Writer. And I'll just drag that down to the window here. And the only thing I need to do here is tell it where my destination database is. So I'll click on the window, it's going to bring up my list, and I'm going to pick this data source here, my EIS destination database. And I'll have to log in again to authenticate, and that's it. And that's basically all you need to do to configure one of these measurement data readers and writers for Proficient. Really not much to it, pretty straightforward. So I'll say OK here. And, oh, actually, I didn't want to do that. I'm going to delete that one quickly because I don't need two of them. Okay, so I've got the one that I already had created. And so now what we can do is go ahead and add some data to our source database and then watch EIS grab that and push it to the destination database. Okay, so I'm just going to add some data to my source database, and I'm just going to bring up my add data window and just type a few values in here pretty quick. And maybe one more. Okay, so I've got that data entered in there, so now I just need to wait for the time to expire for the EIS to do its next read. And when it does that, it'll grab the new records that are in the database, and there it is. And you can see that the chart's just updated. So now those 3 subgroups that I just added have been grabbed by EIS from using the reader from the source database, created the IDEF files that the writer then gobbled up from that same folder and pushed them to the destination database. And now both my databases still contain the same data. So now let's see what happens with EIS if your network connection is interrupted. So this would be that store and forward type of environment where you may have a local access database on the workstation on your shop floor, and that would be used as sort of a primary destination for your data on the shop floor as you're taking your readings, and would use EIS to forward that data to your production database somewhere on a server or elsewhere in your facility. So in normal operation, that would just that handoff would happen just quite naturally, and both databases would maintain the same measurement data. But suppose that the network connection goes down on your production database, and so you would still like to be able to maintain your ability to take data locally on your shop floor workstations, and then have, when that connection is restored, then forward that information up to the production database. So what I'm going to do here is I've got my source database here and my destination database. This database happens to be located on just a storage device that's connected to my computer, but allows me to just sort of disconnect it and sort of break that network connection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually close this out and then remove that database connection, and just to show you what happens with EIS when we remove it and then when we go back and restore that information. So I'm going to close out my chart there that's pointing to my destination database, since that's going to give me an error if it tries to look at something that it can't see any longer. And I'm going to open up my computer, and my F drive here, my flash drive, is where that database is residing. So I'm just going to go ahead and eject that, and that's going to go away. Okay, so that's gone. So now I'm just going to add a few subgroups to my source database here, as I've done in the past. And one more. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to look at my EIS configuration, and I'm going to right-click here and go to this activity window, which we haven't looked at so far, but kind of gives you some useful information about what's going on with your EIS configurations. So you see I've got a lot of things here as far as what kind of documents we're handling, and start times and process times and all that sort of stuff. You can see right here that what I want you to see is that the writer says that it's read some documents, but those documents are available. So it's basically just saying, okay, I've grabbed a hold of these IDEF things, but I don't have any place to put them since the place I was supposed to put them doesn't exist. It's offline. So let's have a look at the folder where those IDEFs are held, and you can see that they're just sitting there waiting quite happily to make it their way to their destination. I can open up and see the values that we typed in there. And so these records will just keep accumulating in this temporary folder, waiting for that network connection to become active again, and that target database to become available again. And once that happens, they'll then get uploaded, and everything will be back to normal. Okay, so I'm going to plug my flash drive back in and restore that network connection, and then we're going to wait for EIS to go through another read cycle and grab those records that have been waiting quite happily in that temporary folder. So let's go and have a look here and open up our configuration. I'm going to open up this activity window again, and you can see that it has gotten rid of those. It no longer says waiting on documents. It just says documents are ready. It's just saying waiting, so it's done its thing, and it's just happily waiting for the next read cycle for the next records to become available. So let's have a look here in that temporary folder, and you can see that those IDEF records that were here have been gobbled up and disappeared. And so let's have a look again at our quality monitor, and they should be agreeing with each other once again. Okay, so those subgroups that I've added here, now that the database connection has been restored, have been uploaded to our destination database, and no data has been lost despite the temporary loss of your network connection. In this demo, we're going to show how EIS can actually route data over the cloud from one database to another. I've got the same chart and database that I was using in previous demos here, my source database located on my local computer here. And what I've got here instead is I've opened up a remote desktop session on another computer located on my home network that I'm also running Proficient on and pointing to a database on that network. So even though the data looks the same, we're actually looking at two separate databases here. And we're going to set up EIS to route information over the cloud. So let's see how we do that. On my laptop, which is the source data, I'm going to open up my EIS Configuration GUI, and I'm going to look at this configuration that I've created called PF4 to Network HTTP. So I'm going to open that up and show you what I've got here. So basically, on one side, I've got just a Proficient measurement data reader, just as I had in previous examples, to grab the new and or changed records, measurement data records from my source database. And the writer, on the other hand, is an HTTP writer. So it's going to create these IDEF messages and route them over the internet. So let's have a look at how we configure that. So you can see here, all I basically need to do is enter a destination IP address. You can see this 192.168 kind of shows that it's on my local network here, but it could be anywhere on the internet. There's a port that's selected here, and you can change that if you like. As long as the ports are open on both ends, it should be okay. And I've got an identity here. I chose IDEF as my identity. It could be anything. You could call it MDI. You could call it whatever you like. As long as it's named the same on both ends of the routing. What's nice about this is you can actually use different identities, but pointing to the same IP address and using the same ports. You could actually have multiple connections, possibly in two different directions, one with measurement data, one with universal data, and just assign them different identities, and you can use the same IP address and port. So you can see I've got that there. I can test my connection on the other end, which will show you. You can see my connection has succeeded. So let's switch over now. Now that we know that that's working, I'm going to close this out and I'm going to switch over to my remote desktop session, and I'm going to open up EIS on the other computer. So you can see I have one called network HTTP to PF4, and let's have a look at that and see what's going on there. So you can see I've got on that end, I've got an HTTP reader to pick up the messages that the HTTP writer on the source computer is generating. I'm going to set up the same IP address as the other side, the same identity, same port, and then I'm going to use the same proficient measurement data writer as I've used previously. I'm going to point it to a different database, the one obviously which is located on that local computer, and that's the DSN name that I have set up on my local computer, on the remote computer. So okay, so I've got that all set up, and that's all good and ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is just add some data to my source database, and then wait for the EIS system to time out and do the read and write, and see if it updates on the other end on my destination database over the cloud. So let's add a couple of data points as we've done previously. And we'll do one more. Let's try that. Okay, so I've got a couple of things there, so a couple of new data points there. So now we're just going to wait for EIS to kick in and see if we get the transfer over to the other database. Okay, so let's see if that transaction has taken place. We'll close this out and just have a look. And you can see that yes, those extra points have been added to the chart, and that's taken place over the internet. It was on my local network, my home network here that I'm doing this webinar from, but it could be any location on the internet. You can see that happens quite nicely, and again happens automatically once you've got things configured. We've spent a bunch of time looking at passing measurement data around from various databases to databases in a few different ways. But one of the other things that EIS can do is pass around structural data. So in our world, that means things like parts, processes, spec limits, jobs, lots, those sorts of information. And this is where you might want to be interacting with like your MES or ERP system, or passing data from a corporate database where your master parts list is created and kept out to the individual sites. So let's see how that works, and I'm going to illustrate how EIS treats edited records, or treats records that are changed, not necessarily new records, but records that have been updated. So I've switched over here from the control chart view, and I'm looking at an application in Proficient called Database Manager, and I'm just looking at, in my demo databases here, the parts that I have entered in there. And you can see in my source database, which is the same sort of source database I've used throughout the demo, I have 4 parts: blue, green, red, and yellow parts. And also in my destination database, which is I'm looking at via remote desktop to another computer on my home network, and I'm looking at that database, and you can see it has the same parts listed there. So I'm going to set up EIS to pass not measurement data, but to pass universal data, so structural data from one database to another. So let's see how that's done on the source end. You can see I have this configuration called PF4 UDI to network HTTP. I gave it these names just to remind myself. You can name these things whatever you like. So let's have a look and see what this is. On one end, on the reader end, I've got, instead of a measurement data reader, I've just picked a universal data reader, but pointing to the same database. And you can see the same settings are done. It's just basically setting a time interval, and you select what database you want to use as your source. And on the other end, I'm using the HTTP writer that will route me to over the cloud to the database on my target computer, my destination computer, elsewhere on my network. Okay, so that works fine. So let's just open that up quick, and you can see here you have just a matter of setting the IP address and the port and identity. You can see compared to the previous demo, I do have a different identity for this one, but using the same IP address and the same port number. So I'll test that, and that looking good there. So let's have a look over on our destination computer, and I'll open that up via remote desktop and bring up our GUI, and I've got this HTTP to PF4 UDI. So let's have a look there. And on that one, I've got the same HTTP reader I had before, which is going to grab those IDEFs once they're written on the other end. And I have, instead of a measurement data writer, I have a universal data writer. But it's set up basically the same way. It's just a matter for me to decide what the name of the destination database is. Okay, so I've got that all set up. And we'll get out of there and close that out. So now what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to add some parts and change some parts on my source database. Move this down here, line these up a little bit. Oops, looks like I've gotten a little change here. There we go, all better. Just clicked on the wrong window there. All right, so I've got Database Manager open up on both computers. So I'm going to start changing. I'm going to change this part. I'm going to click on this blue part here, and I'm going to type a description in here. I'm just going to change this record. This is a new description, and I'll modify that part. And I'm going to add a new part, brand new part, and I'm going to call that zebra part. It's got a lot of different colors on it. And I'm going to change this other one here. Instead of yellow part, you know what? I think I like to call it yellowish part. It's not quite as yellow as I thought it was. Okay, so I've made those several changes. I've changed the description on one part record. I've changed the part name of a different record, and I've added a new part. So let's have a look and see after it updates and see what kind of changes that makes on our destination database. Okay, and now that database is updated, let's have a look here. So you can see the blue part has been changed, and the new description has been uploaded, and now is the same in both databases. The zebra part has been added, so I've got that existing now in both databases. But let's have a look here. I've got a yellowish part here on my source database, but now in my destination database, I still have a yellow part, and now I've also got a yellowish part. And that's just an important thing to remember with EIS, is that if you change the name of your records, for example, in this part record, it was the part name. When EIS grabs that, it's going to see that as a changed record, and it's going to write that to the database, but it'll write it as a new record. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're changing information. If it's supporting information like descriptions like we have here, as long as the name remains the same, it will just update that existing record. But if you actually do change the name, it's going to see that as a new part, and it's going to create another new part record in the database. So it's just something to keep in mind. But you can see that it happened quite nicely. Even we went over the cloud here, over the internet, and now our parts are once again in agreement. Now let's kick it up a notch and start routing data between different applications. EIS will enable you to route your quality data between Proficient and ESPC, which is our web-based application. If routing from Proficient to ESPC, this could enable you to have access to your quality data from anywhere in the world, since ESPC data is hosted in the cloud at several InfinityQS data centers. If routing from ESPC to Proficient, which will be a future release, this could enable you to bring the quality data collected directly by your suppliers into your main Proficient database, which would allow great enhancements in your ability to correlate your internal quality data with that of your suppliers. As mentioned previously, this routing would be accomplished by adding an HTTP reader and writer to allow for passing of IDEF messages over the internet. If the routing involved ESPC, you would also use the reader and writer for that application instead of just the Proficient version. This demo will demonstrate how we can route measurement data from a local Proficient database directly to ESPC, which is our web-based quality application with data centers hosted on the cloud. In the top here, I've got the same local proficient database that I've been using throughout the demo, with the source data shown appropriately. And on the bottom, I'm showing the ESPC application, which is showing the same data right now, with this data being hosted in one of our data centers out on the cloud. So let's see how EIS would be configured to enable this. What I've got here is my configuration called PF4 to HTTP. So let's open that up and have a look and see at how that's constructed. Okay, so I've got my normal proficient measurement data reader here that I've used several other times. No difference there. The difference here on this end is I've got an HTTP writer that points to the ESPC data center that I'm using for this particular application. So if I open that up, you can see the destination IP address is here with the port and the identity being labeled appropriately. And let's test our connection just to make sure that that's working okay. So we can see we have successfully tested our HTTP connection, so we should be ready to go. So I'm going to just close these out and hide this. And now I'm just going to add a few data points to my source database here. And we'll do one more. Okay, so now we just need to wait for EIS to read the source database for new or changed records, generate the IDEF messages, and pass those along the HTTP connection to our ESPC database. Okay, and there we can see that the ESPC database has updated, and signifying that the data has been passed from our local source proficient database out to the cloud to the ESPC application. Just to note that we're not able to show the EIS configuration that's running on the ESP server itself. Obviously, to complete this transaction, there needs to be an HTTP reader and an ESPC data writer on the ESPC server, as shown in the previous slide, but we're just not able to show that for this webinar. The last use case scenario we'll be discussing today involves reading from and writing to non-InfinityQS applications through the use of the IDEF standard format. With XML becoming such a pervasive method of communication, many external applications such as MES or ERP systems have the ability to create custom XML files. If the application can accept XML inputs, IDEF messages can also be pushed to these applications. This option is also available to OEMs who may want their test or measurement systems to communicate using IDEF messages. To help facilitate the adoption of IDEF-based communication, InfinityQS offers a developer's toolkit to assist in the creation of XML messages that conform to the IDEF standard. The configuration in this case can be fairly straightforward. In the case of IDEF to proficient routing, an IDEF file reader would be pointed to the folder location where the external application would place its IDEF messages, and the appropriate writer would then push that information to the destination database. To go in the other direction, simply swap your readers for writers, and vice versa. And again, a developer's toolkit is available to assist you in the creation of IDEF messages. In this demo, we're going to go back to looking at the two charts. One is looking at my source database, and the other one is looking at my destination database. And we're going to route some data between the two using the IDEF file format. So in this case, I've got two different configurations that I'm going to be using. The first one that I've labeled PF4 to file is simply there to create the IDEF message. It is not one that you would use normally if you're going to use generate IDEF messages via your external applications like your MES or ERP systems. You would do that within those applications. But just for the sake of this demo, I'm going to use this configuration to generate those IDEF messages. And I've simply got a proficient measurement data reader here, and then an IDEF file writer. So it's going to grab measurement data from this source database and write it to this folder that I've designated here, this IDEF file write folder. It's going to dump the messages into that folder as it sees new or changed records. The other configuration is where the real action happens here. And this is where I'm going to look in that certain folder for new IDEF files. So this is where the IDEF messages coming from your MES or ERP or testing or gauging system would be placed. And then it is going to use the same proficient measurement data writer that we've used in previous demos to push that data to the proficient database. So looking in here for my IDEF file reader, I'm going to click on here and show you the various options here. I'm looking for my source folder, which is the same file read folder that we showed before. And there's some other folders here that you can designate if you want to designate separate places for error messages or archiving or things like that. We're not going to get into for the sake of this webinar, but they do exist there. And on the writer side, we're going to configure it basically the same as we've done others. We're going to just point it to our destination database. Okay, so as I generate new data, new measurement data in my source database, I'm just going to add a couple of subgroups here. And we'll do one more. Now that I've done that, my IDEF, my proficient measurement data reader is going to look at that database, and it's going to generate IDEF messages into the folder that we designated. Okay, and once the IDEF writer kicks in and the timing kicks in, we're going to create those IDEF messages, and you can see in looking in that folder that I targeted as my destination folder, we've got these two records that are in here. And you can see there's a very long name here with a timestamp type of format, and you can see that the suffix is .idef.mdi. So if we can actually open one of those up and have a look at what the message looks like, which is similar to the one that was shown previously in there, you can see there's a lot of information. And if you kind of glance through, you can see things like part, process, shift, and measurement data, and things like that. Okay, so these are where the kind of thing where if you were generating messages, IDEF messages from an external application, you would place them into a folder like this. And so just to show you the process of it actually getting gobbled up by the EIS system. On the other end, I'm going to just cut these, and I'm going to put it into this read folder, which I've designated as my target folder for grabbing that data. Normally, you'd put these in the same folder, but I just wanted to show you the process of opening up the messages, showing you how they're named, and just demonstrating the process in action. So I'm going to paste these into this folder, and they'll sit there for a second or two, and then they'll get gobbled up by the EIS system. And you can see now that the charts are once again showing the same exact data and those new subgroups that were added. And IDEF files were created. They were then gobbled up by the EIS system. So this is how you would, for your external application, whether ERP, MES, Gauge, or Test Stand, could generate IDEF messages and place them in a folder, and then the EIS system would just grab those as they are generated. This concludes our webinar on InfinityQS's new Enterprise Integration Service. We hope you found it informative and are excited as we are about the possibilities opened up by this new tool. If you have any further questions about EIS, please feel free to call your Global Account Manager at 703-961-0200. You can also look through our online help pages at www.infinityqs.com/help/en/idef. There's a lot more detail there about the specifications of the IDEF format, use cases, and all things EIS. Thanks for taking part in this webinar, and have a great day.